I did it to show you that as much as we practice with metronomes, play along with recordings, and strive to have really good time, we can't be perfect, and it's not even desirable to be perfect all the time. Hi everybody, welcome to Aimee Nolte Music. When I was getting ready to make my last record, I realized that there were some tracks on it that I thought might have the propensity to speed up as we played in the studio. So I decided to call my drummer James and see how he might feel about playing some of those tracks to a click. The answer that he gave me led me to make this video. He told me that in some circumstances he thinks it makes sense to play to a click, especially if musicians are adept at being able to play a groove that feels good to a click, but that in a more improvised jazz situation, which was going to be our album, Lighten Up, it feels much better to play without a click. He said it lets the beat be wider. So we made the album without a click. I started wondering how big of a deal it is to play with strict time adherence. From the time I was a kid playing classical piano, I was taught to practice with a metronome, all the way up until I went to school for jazz. Metronomes, play along with recordings, try your very hardest to have impeccable time. It's the earmark of a great jazz musician. And having played with many groups over the years and recorded a lot of albums and heard a lot of music, I can tell you, it's true. It's really important to have good time. Of course, there's a fundamental difference between having good time and having a good time, which is what I'll focus on for the entirety of this video. I'm just kidding. James told me, yeah, don't sweat it, Aimee. Even if you listen to the pros, you're going to recognize that in many of their tunes, they're speeding up or slowing down. I wanted to see just how much that was going on. So I started clocking performances with my metronome. Right from the beginning, I noticed that studio recordings had much less speeding up and slowing down than live performances did. So, having said that, the rest of my video will mostly focus on live performances. For instance, on the Explorations album, Bill Evans and his trio play the tune Israel, and they start off right at 186. There's a little variance as the tune goes on. This is the studio recording, of course, and they finish right at 186. However, in this video I found of Bill playing with Larry Bunker and Chuck Israels, they start the tune off at 224, and end up at 242 by the end. Same personnel, but on the Trio 65 album, they start at 205 and end up at only 212 by the end, much less speeding up in the studio. But later, during a live performance on a video I found it was a show called Jazz 625, the same trio plays the tune Israel. They start off at 228, Shortly after I made my video about Bill Evans the Minimalist and his playing on Blue and Green, I got an email from Chuck Israels, who wanted me to know that he liked my video, and since that email, we've been corresponding here and there, and he's such a lovely man. So I'm really lucky to be able to have talked with Chuck Israels about why he thinks this might have been the case with his particular trio with Bill and Larry. I'm quoting from Chuck now. Bill didn't seem to mind that things rushed a little, and he certainly contributed to that at times. I didn't notice it until I played with him years later with Philly Joe in the 70s, just before Mark Johnson joined the band. Bill and Joe were both very heavily using drugs and rushing so much that the time did not feel good to me much of the time. Two heroes of mine, and the situation was disastrous. I don't think anything ever got out of hand with the trios with Larry Bunker or Arnie Wise. Larry was a superb musician and would certainly have said something if he had noticed anything he thought detracted from the music. What is certainly musically weak and destructive is irregular rushing in specific instances. For instance, cheating the timing after an anticipation, but that's typically a student problem, or a rushed drum break. Things like that disturb perception of the pulse. I also think that some tempos and some pieces are more susceptible to the problem than others. We didn't usually rush ballads, I don't think, and Bill had beautiful ways of making controlled tempo changes, unusual for jazz trios. We always played the last 8 of Loverman slower than the rest of the piece after a built-in quarter-note triplet retard in the 24th measure. It had an effect of deliberate emphasis I especially appreciated. Bill never spoke about these things, nor did we rehearse them. He just did them with such clarity, conviction, and definition that we always understood how to feel things with him. He also abjured head nods or any other visual cues, saying we'd always hear what to do in the music. As far as I was concerned, he was right. I always understood the rubatos or tempo changes, always with him. I don't really understand how not to be able to coordinate a rubato with someone who played them as logically as Bill did. And he also told me that the Count Basie band was extraordinarily good at holding a tempo. More on that later. I decided to choose some of my jazz heroes at random and clock their performances just for fun. Here's how it turned out. Here's the Bill Evans Trio in the same video from before, starting My Foolish Heart at a 55, very slow BPM. And they're only at 59 by the end. Chuck Israels was right. They didn't rush the ballads. Here's Louis Armstrong, live in 1934 from Copenhagen, playing Dinah. Really cool. Here's Dexter Gordon playing Night in Tunisia. It starts at 230 BPMs and ends up at 231. Whew! Here's a 9-minute version of So What by the Miles Davis Quintet that starts at 151 and ends at 149. This is one of the rare examples I could find that slowed down. John Coltrane's Quartet, playing My Favorite Things, a 20-minute version live, starts at 185 and ends up around 169. Joe Pass with Ella Fitzgerald in 1975, performing You Turned the Tables on Me, is a pretty remarkable selection, I think. It starts at 75.
You turn the tables on me, and now I'm falling for you. You turn the tables on.
Ends up at 76. Both impeccable musicians with impeccable time. Chick Corea starts children's songs in a solo concert at 143 and stays there the whole time. Spain, live in 1973, starts at 117 speeds up just slightly to 121 during the solos and returns to about 119 to finish it off. Chick Corea, very good time. Ray Brown with Benny Green and Gregory Hutchinson in 1996 start this tune called Tanga at 3:33 and get up to 3:40 during Benny's solo. That's pretty great time, especially for a really fast tempo. In this live video of CJM Blues with the Oscar Peterson Trio, they start at 2:04, and then it gets up to about 2:09 when Ed Thigpen comes in, and then 2:12 when Ray Brown joins. Then they creep up to 227 by the end of Oscar's solo, but it was a really exciting solo. NightTrain album, they start off CJM Blues at 2:25 and get up to 2:40 before the end. I found this video of Oscar Peterson playing with Count Basie on a tune called Slow Blues, and something really cool happens there. They start the tune off at around 79 or 80 BPMs and stay there the whole time. When I heard this recording, it brought my mind back to what Chuck Israels had said in his email to me about Count Basie Band. I wondered if Count Basie had some magical talent for keeping the band at a certain tempo, and it sent me down a rabbit hole trying to discover if that was true. I found a live video from 1965 and clocked a bunch of their tunes. Here, Count Basie starts All of Me at 141, but then the band comes in and it immediately slows down to 133. Of the Foo Birds starts at 278, but the band comes in and it slows to 273. The Midnight Sun Will Never Set starts at 82 and finishes at 80. They do very well on slow tempos. Blues for Aileen starts at 147. The horns come in and it's at 140. The thing that I noticed from watching these Count Basie videos, nearly every time that the horns came in on the melody with their figures, they set the tempo. I mean, Basie was never up there conducting. He was always at the piano. And they fell into a tempo that was just right. The band had an uncanny ability to come in with their parts right at the tempo they knew inside and out was the right tempo. All of this Count Basie made me curious about other big bands, so I dove into Duke Ellington for a bit. I found a video of the Ellington band. They start off with A-Train at 159, speed up to about 163 during the solos, and return to exactly 159 to finish it. another video, 1969 in Tivoli Garden, where Duke Ellington starts off A-Train with a brand new kind of intro to take the A-Train as a waltz at 2:20. And he plays this waltz, but as soon as it's time for the band to come in, and this just floored me, they nailed that 159 tempo that I had heard them playing years before in the other concert. This is just more evidence that big bands, in particular, were really, really keyed into the way that a certain tempo felt at the very right place, the place that they had rehearsed the most, the place that their band leaders counted off the most, and they knew was right. Right there in their soul. Something else that I noticed. Every time after playing the melody at the beginning of a song, there would be solos, and every time during the solos, the tempo would start to rush. But as soon as it was time for the band to come back in with their figures or the melody, the tempo would invariably return to where it was at the beginning. I noticed this in nearly every recording I listened to. During the solos, it would always speed up. I mean, it's an exciting time, right? Solos, improvising. But always when the band came back in, the tempo went back to where it started, or really close anyway. When I was talking to my husband, John, about all of these things I was noticing, he asked me if I had clocked myself during a live performance. And at that point, I had not. So I watched some footage of my show from the Blue Whale with my quartet about 1.5 years ago. All right, on this tune that I wrote called You Give Love, we start off at 155 and end up at 171. Atrocious. Apparently, I need to work on my swinging waltz feel and relaxing a little bit more.
In a fast-paced world where people like to play it smart and hardly ever give their hearts, you give me joy, you give me life,
My duets with Mike Scott stayed pretty nicely in time. All Too Soon just slowed down 1 BPM from 57 to 56.
You should know as well as You should know as well as
And the quick bossa, So in Love, starts at 177 and finishes at 181.
Strange dear, but true dear.
I sang Blackbird with Bruce Lett, my bass player, that night, as a duet, just voice and bass. And we started at 134 and ended up at 144 by the end.
Pack up all my cares and woe. Well, here I go, singing low. I'll make my bed and light the light, 'cause I'm coming home so late tonight.
The interesting thing was, I also played Blackbird in the studio in the same setting with John Clayton, just voice and bass. We played it at 118 that day and only sped up to 119 by the end. Many reasons why this could be the case. I tend to think that my hypothesis about things being more controlled in the studio as opposed to in front of a live audience is probably the main reason, although John Clayton is pretty close to being a human metronome.
Pack up all my cares and woes. Here I go singing low. Blackbird, oh Blackbird.
My thoughts next turned to Latin jazz, masters like Tito Puente and Poncho Sanchez, and I wondered how their amazing sense of time held up to my clocking. In this video, Poncho Sanchez starts Cinderella at 132 and only slows to 129. Muy impresivo. Tito Puente, live at Umbria in 2012. The band plays on Broadway. They start at 1:22 and end at 1:22. More questions about all of this, so I turned to an old professor of mine. Well, he's not old, but Jay Lawrence from BYU, who is a fantastic drummer and percussionist, and I asked Jay what he thought about this. He said that 1:22 tempo is a cha or a cha-cha-cha, and that it's a really, really just a feel that those players know inside and out. So returning to 1:22 is that's just a groove that they know. He says it's the same one as Oye Como Va. Another thing Jay said that really resonated with me was that he has a theory that in the same way that harmony resolves, tempo can also resolve. He said it can give and take where it needs to, like during solos, but it should always come back. He said that even though no human is really a metronome, if the bass and the drums are locked in and everybody feels that from the bottom up, which is another thing that Chuck Israels mentioned, it feels so good and the time can stay put pretty much. But he did say that he can think of 3 occurrences where it might not be desirable to have impeccable time. The first is when swing tunes change from a 2 feel to a 4 feel. That's when it's boom, 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 changes to doom, 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 doom. And he says that when that happens, there's a very human reaction to this change that just makes you want to lean forward just a little bit, like you're walking. And he says that's okay because you feel like it has to happen, so it can happen just a little, and it's all right. He also says in blues and 12/8 music, it works best if the backbeat comes just at the last second so that you feel laid back, but the tempo actually doesn't really change. He also said that if you listen to Art Blakey play on shuffles like Moanin', you'll hear that he actually rushes that backbeat just a little bit, but the tempo doesn't change. He says it feels like it does, but if you're doing it right, it shouldn't really change. But the third instance that he thought of was in Afro-Cuban rumbas. He said, these people that play this amazingly intricate music just wake up in the morning playing their drums and play all the way until it's bedtime. And the pieces that they perform start at a tempo and on purpose speed up. He really got me interested in this, and I've been listening to a lot of this music. Some bands that he wanted me to check out are Afrocuba, Los Muñequitos de Matanzas, and Los Papines. The last thing that Jay told me was that in order to play with good time, you have to have a relaxed intensity. Those words kind of contradict each other, which is cool. He said the best ways to get better at playing in time are to play with a metronome, to play along with recordings, and to play with musicians who you know are seasoned and do have great time. He said we have to keep things moving when we play music. He said that there's a reason we use words like walking bass, stride piano, riding the cymbal. They're all moving kind of words, and that's what music needs to do to us. That also coincided with one more thing that Chuck Israels shared with me. He talked about music being a human experience, and even more than that, He said, not a sexual, but a sensual experience that you feel in your body. There has to be something danceable about it. And that's what makes us really love it, is that it creates some response inside of us. I really want you to know that I in no way wanted to diminish your opinion of the great players by, clocking them and telling you whether or not they sped up or slowed down. Quite the opposite. I did it to show you that as much as we practice with metronomes, play along with recordings, and strive to have really good time, we can't be perfect, and it's not even desirable to be perfect all the time. I clocked these recordings to let you know that your heroes were not infallible. They were human beings making beautiful, meaningful music to the best of their abilities. And that's what we try to do. Make beautiful, meaningful music that moves people. So don't be so hard on yourself. Try to have good time, but realize that you're human, and that's awesome. Just keep things moving. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Aimee Nolte Music.